Good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to welcome you to our webinar today with Nico of Sun Pharma and Uzair Ansari of Core Data. It's an odd time that we're going through, but hopefully we can provide you a lot of value in the next 30 to 60 minutes. So very excited to have you join us today. As you can see, Nico and I are joining from our respective homes. Uzair is having some issues getting his webcam working, but you can see him in his picture here today. So just quick introductions about my panelists, and then we'll get into the content of the webinar. So Nico is currently serving as Senior Manager, Compliance Operations and Transparency at Sun Pharma. In the past, he has held positions at G&M Health, and he has submitted transparency, federal and state reports for a variety of companies throughout his career. He's been a good friend. We've seen each other at conferences and spoken together. And on my right today is my colleague Uzair. He's a delivery lead at Core Data, and he's been responsible for submitting transparency reports this year for a dozen customers, and over the last 3 years, many customers, and I think he's submitted close to 80 plus different reports across his career. Here's a little bit more about Nico. He is also a licensed attorney, and as I mentioned before, he has served as board member for Policy and Medicine's compliance update. He continues to serve and write in there, and has been a member of the Sharing Alliance. Welcome, Nico. Any initial thoughts you want to say about yourself as well?
Thank you, Mohammed. I think you said a lot already, so I think we could continue on.
Okay, thank you. And my colleague Uzair, as I just covered his quick introduction, been working with our customers for the last 3 years in different aspects of transparency reporting, and he's worked in the past with several leading technical consulting companies in the UK. Welcome, Uzair. Any initial thoughts on yourself as well?
None on myself, but thank you for having me, Mohammed, and welcome everyone to the call.
Okay, great. And just a quick introduction about myself. I think the only thing you need to take away from this is I'm known as a data geek in Core Data. The rest of the stuff you'll get in slides and perhaps can cover later. So just some logistics and housekeeping items. This is being conducted as a webinar. Nico and I are of course sharing our webcams as well. And if you have any questions, there is a questions box that you should see in your GoToMeeting panel. Please ask your questions there. We'll take them at the end of the webinar, or as we are going through the conversation. If something sticks out, do ask it. I'll be happy to share with my colleagues here and get that question resolved. We will record this webinar, so you're going to get a copy of it. The views and opinions expressed by the speakers are their own. This is a necessary language, as some of you lawyers might know, and of course does not reflect the official policy or position of either Core Data or Sun Pharma. You'll all be muted throughout this conversation, but if there is a question, please use the chat or the questions box to invoke it. So the agenda for this webinar, even though it's going to be a conversational chat, we wanted to cover 3 main topics. One, what are some of the key challenges that were faced during this year's transparency reporting, especially since we started to see this pandemic rise through March, and several of the companies had to go for operate in a very different mode, work from home. The second part of the conversation will focus on what are some of the learnings, what are some of the improvements that we can take from this to move us forward for next year's planning. And Nico and Uzair will share some of the things that they're going to do at their respective firms and clients to really smooth out the upcoming year's reporting. And then the third conversation is a little bit around the expansion of Sunshine as it relates to the additional covered recipients in the US for next year. How do we think about it? What can we put in place there? So before we get into the panel discussion, just a quick polling question from our attendees. I'll invoke the poll right now. You should see it on your screen. But the question really is, what was the biggest challenge for you this year as you work through transparency reporting process? The poll should come on your screen, and if you can quickly vote, I'll share the results here in a second with everyone as well. The options, of course, are challenges with the CMS portal, challenges with physician mapping, and then data quality, data collection. Some of the folks I've talked to also struggled with loading data into the aggregate spend system, so having to do things manually. And just give maybe an additional 10 seconds before I share the results of what the audience has voted. Looks like there are still folks voting, so I'll give maybe a few more seconds. And what we will do is we'll take this as sort of the starting point of our conversation with Nico and Uzair, and walk through these issues. So let me just share the poll results. I'm closing the poll, and let me see if you're able to see the results on my screen. Okay, so we see that it's an even split, which is quite quite interesting, that almost quarter of the people felt that the CMS portal was their biggest challenge, quarter of the people on physician matching, and some on data quality and data collection. Very, very interesting. It looks like nobody felt loading data into the aggregate spend system was the major issue. So as we go through it, please do share what were some of the other challenges that you faced. You can share that in the chat box or ask questions. So with that, I'd like to get started with the discussion. And the first topic for today is going to be just looking back. How did the reporting go for this year? What were some of the core highlights that you would say as part of this reporting period? So I'll ask that question to you, Nico, first, and then I'll move to Uzair. So if you can perhaps highlight how did this current reporting year go for you?
Sure. So this was the second year that I did Sunshine reporting for Sun, which also includes several other entities for the companies. So there's another company called Taro Pharmaceuticals, and another subsidiary of Sun's is DUSA Pharmaceuticals. So with those three entities, for DUSA and Sun, those are handled differently than Taro. So there's the structure on how things get submitted and reviewed internally is different for both entities, as one goes to one CFO at that company and CFO for the other companies, Sun and DUSA. So with that in mind, it's how do you, with all the data coming into one feed, like for example Concur, it's how do you separate that out? And then also two is Taro had a sales force that sees promotion in April, and most of all those employees came to Sun. So it resulted in a large influx in meal spend, and so also at the same time we had an influx of products being promoted in the field. So last year, we had spent in maybe 1.5 million or so, and then this year spend is close to 6 million or more. So that's a huge influx of records, and that's just physician spend. So like on the Concur side with meal spend, it was huge. I mean, there was maybe close to 40,000 records related to physician meal data. And so, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about, okay, well, once mid-levels get get reported on, this is going to increase substantially, because a lot of the excluded data that I had was that mid-level data. And so for the most part, reporting went fine. It was just a challenge to see the amount of records that I had to work with compared to last year. And I think, was getting a better sense of, what is the data saying? What's the data telling me this year? And then also getting more, looking at the Concur feed more with a finer, finer point there, and trying to see, okay, is there anything I could do here with the data that I haven't done before? So, from the analytical standpoint, right now we're not using any type of service or software. So a lot of everything is done manually, and it was trying to say, okay, with all the different departments that we have, how can I identify that? So in some of the Concur fields, there's fields there for the department where the spend is coming from. So I was able to really use that to map where certain products should be, especially for those that reps were not filling in that information. And so, with that, it was a lot of information at the very end. And so, and then on top of it, we also had some internal structural changes where the attester and officers were different for the companies this year. So that actually went all the way up till the very end of reporting. And so we actually wrapped up reporting on March 30th. And, so we had to, work with one of the officers who was in India at that time, and CMS needed to unlock their account to reset passwords, and then transfer, responsibilities to, the new officers and the testers for this year. So, I mean, most of the data, everything like that was ready to go. And then of course, we also had challenges with some vendors where it's at the very last minute where you're getting information, or you're looking at the data believing that you have everything, and going, hey, you forgot to put the city and state for the travel spend. And so what I've noticed too was, doing this since 2013, I was starting to think by this year, most of everybody kind of like on the vendor side should know about this and what information needs to get collected. On our side, where people that I've interacted with before, I got a lot more questions about Sunshine. So it was also in a way where it's, okay, how do I explain the requirements without getting somebody confused? And and that was how to do it in a way where, especially when you're interacting with senior level stakeholders like CEO or CFO, you have to really hit them with the what they need to know and quick, without them getting lost into what's a covered drug, what's an applicable manufacturer. Is just to be straight, direct to the point, and not get lost into the nuances with things.
That's quite a hectic reporting cycle, going through many subsidiaries, different certification processes, role changes, having to do splitting transactions from Concur. I see a lot of challenges, and no wonder you barely made it on March 30th, which is I guess it's surprising for the industry itself, because we still see a lot of customers struggle all the way to the very end, even though we're doing it for the 6th year now, and there's some level of expectation that we would be better at this, and as you mentioned, would maybe get this done a lot earlier, and then really focus on value from this data analytics, and making sure we're not pushing something out in the public domain that's going to come back and hurt our organizations. But I guess that's still a far-fledged dream or challenge for
yeah, because our fiscal year is April 1st, so And the CFOs too, their focus is, okay, we have a deadline for March 31st. Why do we need to worry about this on March 1st? Let's take it up till whenever we need to do it. And that at a time is beneficial too, because like when you think about the Concur spend, not every rep has everything submitted by December 31st. We still get records into February, maybe sometimes March. And of course, to complicate matters is the first report that's due now is Nevada. So if you're not pushing the responsibility on the rep to submit, I'm taking on that role and doing the submission for those reps that are there promoting in Nevada.
Yeah, interesting how transactions have a way of making it to us towards the last part of March for things that have been done for the whole last year. That continues to be the story. So I'll move to Uzair. Uzair, what were your thoughts in going into this year, and how did it come out? Especially, I know you were handling close to a dozen customers submitting. How did it impact remote, when people were doing remote work, and what are some of the highlights for you?
Sure. I think, I felt very comfortable this year going into the reporting cycle. And when I say going into it, I mean typically around November, December time. I thought, we were going to be okay. At that point, there was, I think, 7 or 8 customers that we were going to be reporting for, and then we had an influx towards the end of the year. So, basically, we were prepared as best as we could be. And then around January time, and this is around the time that the Axpen tool, which was developed in-house, was launched to the public as well. And we thought we were very keen to try it out. So what we did was that out of by that time we had 12 customers who we were reporting for. A few of those we decided to move on to the new ones that had come in. We were deciding that we would go directly with the Axpen implementation. For some of our old customers, we decided that we would want to migrate them to the new tool because we considered it to be a more efficient solution than what was in place previously. And for others where it was more of a challenge, we decided to stick with the current solution that we have. So overall, it was I think the coordination aspect of it got a bit too much, and at times we were overwhelmed. But then towards the end of January, when the data started to come in, when all the implementations were done, it all started to come together. It all started to make sense, and we entered into the phase where we were processing files, the last bits of information that were coming in from all of our clients, sending out queries, getting them resolved. There was a lot of to and fro, and then towards the start of March, when the whole COVID situation kicked in, coordination became more of a challenge again, and this was primarily due to obviously the compliance teams figuring them being uncertain about the way forward, about whether they would be what their priorities should be, what their work situation would be like. A lot of them decided to work, I think a lot of them even right in the first week of March, they had already started to work from home. So at that time, yes, coordination did become a challenge again. But glad to see it all ironed out, and we were done with about all of our reports quite a fair bit before deadline day. There was one particular day that's a highlight for me, where we submitted four customers' reports on the portal simultaneously, and all 4 of them we were able to get them in after resolving all the issues, all the errors. So that was particularly the highlight for me. There were a couple that went all the way up to March 31st, and that was a bit on, we were on the edge with those ones. We were, trying to resolve the issues on the portal as quickly as possible. But yeah, overall it worked out fairly well, I would say.
Thank you for sharing, Uzair. It feels like every year we go into the cycle thinking we're going to be done in February and March. And then, of course, we have those late coming transactions. We have those CMS portal challenges. And of course, this year, a lot more complication with COVID and of course, the expectation that perhaps CMS would move the deadline when the tax deadlines have been moved. But some anticipation, some changes, and of course, we still had to get everything done. So I guess the question I asked the audience before I asked you folks was, what are some of the key challenges that we faced in this year's reporting cycle as we worked through the COVID situation? So I know you've mentioned that there were challenges with CMS portal and physician matching, and of course, Nico, you've mentioned a variety of things around just making sure that the right transactions are attested by the right attesters, and then combining subsidiaries, and then getting access to CMS. So I'll start with you, Nico. If you could you maybe share some of the key challenges and how you went about resolving those, and perhaps if you can share some learnings from those, that would be helpful for the audience.
Sure. So, I also faced challenges with the CMS portal. And so one of them was when I submitted all the data, you have to cross your fingers and hope that there's not too many failed matching validation or, the other errors that you could get, with that. And so when it went through, because, obviously this was for the general spend, it was a substantial amount of information this year. You're talking about 40,000 plus records, and, maybe 1,000 records initially came back and were rejected and said failed validation. But what I also noticed when I was looking at the records, that I was getting a warning sign saying that the market name of the product does not match the NPI, no, not NPI, the NDC database. So now, as one of the tools CMS gives you is to do an NDC validation, similar to the VPL, the validated physician list. So I was looking at the products, how I had named them in the RAG spend tool to see, what is being actually reflected in the NDC lookup. And so there was differences there. I'm not sure. I think the records would have been attested to. I think it was just one of those errors where they're saying, hey, just so you know, the NDC, the market name that you have here is not correct. So I was going through and actually had to, I just wind up going through and changing all the records. So I just backed out the entire file, went back in the ag spend system, renamed all the products, and then pushed it through again. And so then a lot of the challenges were just with the failed validation for specialty. So they still don't, CMS still does not recognize specialists and of course students. So majority of the records were students. So I was able to just delete those from within the CMS system. And then for the specialists, what I've done before in the past is I believe that they should be submitted. And I think my way of doing it is one way to approach it is to change that specialist designation to whatever the general specialist designation is for that record. So we have a lot of derm products, and we also have a strong ophthalmic brand team too. And so, it's taking those doctors there that are specialist ophthalmologists, and the other ones dermatologists. And for the most part, CMS actually accepts those, and it goes without issue. Anything else that gets rejected, again, just back everything out. There's a record of that, hey, we did submit this, in case CMS wants to see those records, and then push it through. So that was fine. And then I ran into this issue on the research side, which was I wound up having the CFO on the phone and told him, okay, let's do the attestation now. He's ready to go. We do one of the entities, everything goes without issue, and I hit the submit for final submission, which allows the attester then to press the buttons on his end to say, okay, let's begin attestation, and the research failed. it said to contact CMS and to talk with them for whatever the issue is. And this is actually something that happened last year with research again. So I was kind of like, okay, I kind of know what they're going to say is basically I have to remove the file completely and re-upload it, but I will not be allowed to make any edits within the CMS system. All edits have to be done outside, which is a bit challenging because the feed that's coming from the ag spend vendor, if you're not familiar with how to edit the file and the pipe delimit it for Excel, it's not easy to work with. And so what I wound up doing is editing that file and had to make those changes in there and then submit it back to CMS in order so that we could not correct the data within the system. Just to make the corrections within that Excel file and then push it through. And this, interestingly enough, this was something that happened last year too with research. And I had talked with CMS this year again, and I had joked around with them saying, I'm glad this wasn't the general payments file, because I don't know if I would have made those edits again, because I had already made a substantial amount of edits within the system to begin with. But it went through, and then we just wound up testing later that day, a few hours later, and everything was fine. But again, it's like, it's the same thing year after year, and those challenges, as we enter a new phase in reporting, I think we're going to continue to see these challenges. And with physician matching too, there's also, I touched on that, and what I was able to do is I took the universe of the records within our ag spend system and to kind of edit the records to change the golden record that we have. So everything that's coming in matches to this. So basically what I did is I signed a matching system to these records, bounce them against the VPL, and to kind of just clean everything up. And so that helped a lot this year. But again, if you're not that technical, you're working with the limitations of wherever you're getting the data. Hopefully through Concur or with the MedPro lookups, because for the most part that data is near perfect to match.
Okay, that's a lot of war stories. Sitting with your CFO and the submission failing, I guess that.
That wasn't, because it was like, of all things that have to happen, it's like, listen, because a lot of times you're hand holding the whole way through, and they're relying on you. You're the expert, and all of a sudden it's like they're looking at you. Wait a minute, should I even really be holding your hand right now? And you have to explain, hey, listen, this is normal. Sometimes it happens. At the end of the day, they understand. They know you have it under control, and as long as you don't miss the deadline, you go with that. And that was the thing too, just letting them know, hey, just so you guys know that CMS hasn't extended the deadline. We're still going to report if nothing is impeding us to report on time. We needed to do it.
Makes sense. And I think just the call out there and how you resolved it in terms of going and fixing the pipe delimited formatted file, which I think you're fairly technical to figure that out in Excel, but that could be problematic for a lot of folks. And if you imagine going into next year with a lot more transactions, a lot more covered recipients, I think folks that are traditionally doing it with Excel are going to find it very, very tough. I want to reach out to Uzair. Uzair, any stories from your side that you'd like to share in terms of challenges around the portal, around physician matching, or anything else that you saw in our customers?
Sure. So yeah, very similar stories to Nico's in terms of the issues that he encountered. I think we saw a lot of those, we experienced those as well when submitting to CMS. I think by the end of it all, I think or at least once you've done a couple of submissions, you sort of start to develop a cheat for of sorts where the type of issues that are appearing and how to resolve them. So we can I can certainly share a few examples of those. So for example, when we struggle to get certain people in, when there's a problem with the NPI, the very last resort that we had was to remove the NPI altogether, and unexpectedly the system would just accept it. So that was something that worked for quite a few records for us. Another one was very particular to California HCPs. They have a license where there's a prefix at the start of it, and we noted that the CMS portal would throw up an issue every time we would submit someone with the prefix in there, although it's there in the VPL, right? But the CMS portal still doesn't like it. So we noted that if you remove those prefixes and just send the numeric part of the license in, then it would go through, right? And that because there's a lot of HCPs who get reported from California, so it used to resolve, it used to cut down quite a few issues, and we would make those changes in bulk. Once we had uploaded it, seen the errors, we would take the error log off, make the changes at the back end, and then do a re-upload. And connected to this, with for the bulk uploads, typically the process that there's no written rule obviously, but the process that we follow is, if you have a large number of records that are throwing up an error that the CMS isn't happy with, so validation errors or matching errors, if it's more than 50, then what we usually do is that we download the error log, take it back with us to the Axpen tool, make changes there, and then re-upload a file. But that also, they say, caused a significant hiccup for us, for one of our customers. When we uploaded the first time, there were around 1,000 errors, and we thought, let's delete the old file, let's upload a new one. So I tried to delete the file of the system, and for some reason the file wouldn't go away. The file was still there. I could see the records there, and all it did was it removed the metadata where it says this is, if you click on the file ID, it gives you a screen pops up with the file information. So this is the file name and so on. That was wiped out. The delete button was still there. I would press it and it wouldn't do anything, right? So the records were there, and they were close to around 20,000 records. So I wasn't going in there and deleting them 100 at a time, which is the most that you can do manually. So took us a couple of days to figure it out, but the way around it was that you can actually submit a file to delete those records from there. So if you change the consolidated report indicator to be set to delete, for all of those record IDs, you can actually delete them. Right, so that was another one that we experienced on the portal. And there's obviously some other, some very interesting ones. Right, there was a validation issue that popped up where there wasn't a validation error associated with it, so you couldn't figure out what it was. It's a tip for anyone that if you're seeing something like this, then the way we resolved it was that we went into the product page, and usually if you have non-covered products, you don't submit. The CMS doesn't accept the name of the product, right? So in those cases, it was a non-covered product, but it had a name associated with it. So CMS was throwing in an error over there, removed the name, and it worked. So just something for you to keep in mind, perhaps. Coming on to physician matching, this is a challenge that we face every year. I think not just us, but compliance teams in general. 95% of your records in general are, they're always easy to collect, to aggregate, to verify. It's usually the 5% that everyone struggles with, and these are because these are down to discrepancies in your data collection, in the verification sources. VPL and NPAS or any other sources that we utilize aren't 100% accurate, in my opinion. So there's always challenges there. And then of course there's the special use cases like students which I think Nico already mentioned as well, and the specialties such as specialist, and there are others as well, which the CMS doesn't accept, but they're still reportable positions. I think in general these were the two areas that we faced the most challenges in this year.
Thank you, Uzair. Looks like a similar set across the board, both CMS and physician matching, and of course there's other areas of data collection that our audience voted and data quality. But I find it amusing, maybe interesting, that 5 years in, while companies are struggling to get the data in time, but CMS is also struggling to make sure that the portal is bug-free. And knowing how the government operates, I guess we can at some level expect that. But one thing that this year was kind of a little bit of I think one area that I thought was interesting was that the CMS deadline wasn't extended. So when you found out, or at least realized, that the CMS deadline isn't going to be extended, did any of you feel disappointed, or were you already envisioning that was going to be the case? And perhaps if you want to start here first, Uzair, and then I'll go to Nico.
Sure. So we were expecting the deadline to not be move forward, and this was due to obviously the long. This was due to the fact that it's not actually in the CMS's hands to extend the deadline. I think that decision is made by the powers to be. So we were sort of prepared for that. We tried to, in most cases, because we had planned in advance, we had quite detailed project plans. So we weren't quite affected by this in most cases. However, like I previously mentioned, there were a couple of customers where we were actually submitting for them on the last couple of days. So in those cases, yes, we were wishing for maybe an extension of the deadline, but we know it wasn't going to happen.
How was it at your end, Nico?
Yeah, I mean, once March hit, I was kind of like wondering when CMS would at least come out and acknowledge that there's something going on, right? And say, okay, we're not going to extend the deadline, and which didn't really happen till like the last week of reporting, which is like, hey, listen, we're not extending the deadline. We don't have the statutory authority. Now, I tend to disagree that they couldn't have pushed it back, because there's plenty of times where, like, because CMS is part of HHS, FDA does it plenty of times where they have statutory deadlines that they don't follow, or they push back. And so CMS could have done the same thing here if they wanted to, but they chose not to. But they gave some flexibility to companies, that were actually impacted, by the virus. In a way, I'm kind of glad they didn't extend it, because I think would allow for a lot of people to procrastinate a little longer than we needed to. And at the end of the day, it was like kind of glad just to get it over and done with for the year.
Yeah, that feeling when you press the button and it goes in and you're done.
Yeah, it's done.
I don't have to worry about it till next year.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Yeah, so glad to see that. So I'm gonna launch the second poll quickly for our audience, just to see if there was anyone that really took advantage of the situation, in the sense that if you weren't able to submit, but if I could get some quick poll from our audience, were you able to submit? If you were required to submit, were you able to submit on March 31st or before meeting the CMS deadline? And if you were delayed, what was the potential reason for delaying? Was it because of the pandemic, coronavirus, or was there other reasons in the organization? Maybe I'll give another 10 seconds or so. Looks like more than half the folks have already voted. But so I guess just, as Nico mentioned, getting it done is a great feeling, and since CMS did not extend, for a lot of us, that might be a blessing in disguise. So I'll close the poll. It looks like almost everyone voted for being done in time, which is great. That's excellent. Looks like everyone was able to make it in time, and even through this period of uncertainty, we were able to push forward and get it done. So the next question, I guess, is, or topic of discussion is, with the expansion of the covered recipients next year, how do you think your work in terms of both the level of effort required and your role will evolve in the transparency reporting process? And Nico, if you can start there first, how are you thinking about this for next year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to plan now. So it's really looking at the bulk of the records, which are our mail spend, and seeing the shape that they're in. Do we have the information that's going to be needed for reporting? Just looking at the MPES database, just doing some spot checking to see what information's like, because obviously we'll have some records that are registered nurses, but how do you know that they're not hold an advanced practice degree as an APRN or midwife or nurse practitioner, etc. So I think with this year too, the impact of the pandemic is going to impact how many records that we have. But I think at the same time, it's going to include a more expansive role in what's needed. I think a lot more education to the business is going to be needed to let them know, hey, we're going to be expanding Sunshine with our collection efforts and starting in 2021. And obviously, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Hopefully CMS will be active on their front, come the beginning of the year, hopefully no later than the summer, to help us get a better understanding of how they're going to be matching data, which unfortunately I think what likely will happen, we won't hear anything from them possibly till early 2022 on how they plan to match records. So in a way, it's just better collection efforts on my end. I think more education to vendors too, to see what some of their issues with, what are they struggling with, what do they need help with, is it how they're collecting the information, or is it how reps are entering information on their end. So it's just try to get a better understanding where everybody is from a knowledge standpoint.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned that I want to kind of highlight, last year in the August transparency conference hosted by CBI, we had the director Robin Usi from CMS, and one of the questions that the audience asked was exactly this: how are people going to match to these additional recipients, and what's going to be the help that CMS will provide? And she was very upfront. She's like, there's currently she does not know of a way to actually do it today, and she does not know what will come out in the future, which was kind of surprising. But even the panel that was discussing it actually had similar thoughts. Even though there's vendors that claim to have some of this data, I think it'll be interesting to see how this whole plays out in the future. Uzair, do you have any thoughts on how this will be handled for our customers?
Yeah, Mohammed, I think next year is going to be a challenge. Obviously, the first year is going to be a challenge, right? For both for us and for our customers, in the sense that more stringent checks need to be put in towards data collection, first of all, to make sure we're first of all collecting the information of people who need to be reported, and secondly that we're capturing it accurately, right? So at the moment, some pharma manufacturers pay a lot more attention than others do to this, I think. But it's as currently the CMS has a very narrow requirement, so they choose to focus on the ones that need to be reported rather than the ones that don't. I think, going forward, in the first year, we're going to struggle with this data collections element. We're also going to struggle with incorporating those requirements in the Axpen tools or the solutions that we have. But then, I'm actually going to go out on a limb here and say that in the long run, this is going to make life a lot more simpler for not just for us, but I think for compliance teams in general. And the reason for that is that, once the Sunshine Act actually expands, and you sort of move towards more towards a one size fits all model, right? So once the checks are all in place, once the upgrades have been done, it's going to become a standardized process where you're not going to have to keep track of the various different state regulations. Some of them may already be covered under the preemption. Physician verification may eventually become less of a challenge, since you're just going to be perhaps looking up data from physician information from, let's say, the VPL or NPAS, rather than having to log on to each of the state portals and verifying the licenses there. So I do see a silver lining to this.
It's great to be optimistic with all this additional transactions that we'll have to sort through. At least there's some hope that things will get standardized. So the next question I wanted to talk a little bit about was, what are some of the changes you will make for next year's reporting cycle, and how are compliance teams impacted by work from home? And I want to tackle that from two angles. One, of course, this quarter and next quarter, our sales teams are not going into physician offices, right? So that whole lunch and learn process, the whole where the bulk of the transactions come in for T&E that we have to submit, at least the data volume for these 2 quarters is going to be relatively low. But also, I think moving forward, a lot more remote detailing, a lot more of those things will come into the commercial teams. But how will compliance teams be affected, if anything, by some of these changes? And what are you looking to do to improve your processes going into next year? So Nico, if you can start first.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more policy-based this year. Obviously, we need to revise our SOPs on Sunshine requirements to include the additional, recipients that will be subject to the Act, and also then, more education to the field to make them more aware. Obviously, at the same time, there's a big impact with what's going on now that will have impact to Sunshine from the work from home aspect and the pandemic. So right now, what we're doing, we're allowing some virtual lunch and learns, virtual speaker programs. And so, there's going to be some meal spend. I don't envision it as much as it was this past year. And so it's, how do you have, okay, I want to make all these changes in how we collect data, but then at the same time, how do we do that in this new environment that, we're living in? And so it's, there's the balance of, hey, we want to do things one way, but then also at the same time, you don't want to put any impediments to the business. I mean, because this is a critical time for every manufacturer out there, especially that needs to be in the doctor's office, especially if it's, elective procedures and whatnot. So it's difficult right now, and it's just kind of adapting to the new environment. I think adapting is going to take time, and it's going to be unique to every single company. And so in terms of Sunshine, I think there'll be a major impact to everybody's how they collect data, how it's reported, but I don't think we'll see the impact until it goes public in June of 2021.
Yeah, I do expect a lot less transactions next year's reporting cycle, because we wouldn't have hit the new covered recipients, and this year's data is going to be shrunk 30–40% at least. Uzair, what are some of the changes we're making on our customer recommending to our customers to make sure we get done to be better prepared for next year's cycle.
Sure. So, I think one of the points that Nico also touched upon, as we're finding new ways of interacting in the field, virtual lunch and learns. This is a concept that is fairly new to me as well. But I think there's going to be others as well that are going to that are going to be implementing similar practices. An important aspect, at least in terms of transparency, is that it's probably the best time to review your assumptions document if you have one. If you don't have one, it's I would suggest going ahead and creating it. This we don't know how long this situation is going to last, and it may be for a couple of months, it may be even longer. But the thing is, let's try and just create those assumptions for and so that we can actually review them at the end of the year when we're reporting, right? So we can actually see why we did what we did and how we are actually going to report that. I think that's one key takeaway that I would I would be suggesting to everyone at this point. Other thing, another thing I would like to mention is that at this time, that at this in the current situation that we are in, I think we are finding time to focus on things that we haven't been able to do in the past, right? So, and this was something that I noted during the reporting cycle this year. I saw a lot more, a lot more compliance professionals actually focusing on reporting this year than that or paying a lot of spending more time on actually resolution of issues, and we were able to get queries resolved much quicker than we had been in the past. Another thing was that they were actually a lot more requests from us to pull up their spends to see if there were any compliance violations in their spend, such as outliers, duplicates, things which usually get lost in the noise, basically because of all the other activities that compliance professionals would be engaged in throughout the year. If they were, especially if they are not in the situation, not in a work from home situation. So these are, some things that I guess we should focus on in the current scenario, and then moving forward as well, would be helpful.
Okay, fantastic. And we're coming to the close of time. So audience, if you have any questions, please send them my way through the questions box. I'll take them in just a couple of minutes. So rapid fire, Nico and Uzair, your top 3 key takeaways for this for our audience here as they embark on this journey for next year. What would you recommend, Nico?
Yeah, my 3 things would be you got to know your data. You got to really be intimate with it, know where it's coming from, to make sure at the end of the day that it's accurate and complete. The other thing would be you got to stay informed of latest developments, but that doesn't mean to ignore the original, the final rule. It's helpful to re-review it every now and then. Go look through CMS FAQs, see what's new, if not. What do you subscribe to? Do you use blogs? What websites just to stay relevant? Don't be afraid to reach out to peers, for information. The last thing would be to assess yourself. It's basically look at how you did reporting this year, and grade yourself. What would you do differently going into next year? What could you have done better? What could you have done more? And I think that's important at the end of the day.
Okay, Uzair, what are your top 3?
Yeah, so I would say review your spend on a quarterly basis, if possible, or or at a frequency that is at least that addresses the issue in a timely manner. It's typically if you're addressing your transactions at the end of the year, that's by that time you've lost the context and it's much more difficult to track back. The other thing, secondly, I would say we need to, if you haven't already figured it out, I would suggest improving the process around identifying students. I think that's one of the biggest pain points, and one that usually a lot of compliance professionals experience when they're submitting. Note it down in the assumptions document, maybe as to how, as to whether you're going to exclude them, as to whether you're going to try and submit them, and what is the information that you need to capture around them. Finally, I would suggest, early on in March, because that's when the portal opens, try and do a trial run on the portal as early as possible, on the CMS portal, that is. And it helps to spot issues that you may struggle with at a later stage, and you can then address them in a timely manner as well.
Okay, that's great feedback. I realize both of you had the number one thing that you recommended was similar. Nico, you said knowing your data, and Uzair, you said reviewing your data every quarter. Looks like that's a good practice, a healthy practice to really embark on. So before we kind of get to the end and close this out, just wanted to kind of cover if anyone in the audience is looking for help with CMS or Sunshine spend in a prepackaged aggregate spend tool that combines not only the statutory requirements of submission, but also allows you to review, analyze, and look at your data across the organization in a visual way, so that you're comfortable with your spending patterns and comfortable with your data, as well as does the physician matching automatically. Core Data has a solution. We'll be happy to help you. Just realize that going into next year, there'll be a lot more data and there'll be a lot more covered recipients. And if we don't have a plan in place from now, it'll become very challenging to do any of this manually. So I just covered that in a second. Happy to have a conversation. Happy to help in any capacity that we can as an organization. We realize everyone's going through tough times these days, so happy to do our part. I guess just one of the questions that's coming up from the audience members is, and then we'll end in a minute here. Nico, if you can perhaps take this question. So while the federal submission process looks like they will add additional covered recipients next year, is there anything that you see will be different in the state reporting, or do you feel that some of the states would be preempted, or is there going to be additional states that are going to be requiring reports? What is your sense of the horizon, Nico?
Yeah, for the most part, all the states are still going to be there. The one that is not completely out of the picture, but for the most part will not be there is Minnesota. So Minnesota is right now, it's just mid-levels, but they also have dental therapists, so that's not going to be included in the CMS definition of covered recipients beginning in 2021. So state reporting is still going to be there. You're still going to have to do reporting for Nevada because their focus is on at the rep level. And so that's their way to get around preemption. So you're still reporting your physician data for Nevada. Vermont, you're still going to have to report to if you have spend there. Same with Washington, D.C., Connecticut. Connecticut might be one of those ones where, the reporting might not be required, but I could still see them saying, reporting is still required because, we do things, X, Y, or Z differently. And it's going to be a wait and see approach because all states that are doing reporting, they're going to come out with something and just acknowledge, we understand, Sunshine Act is expanding, but it's not preempted here in our state.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Nico. I think we're coming to the end of time. I'd like to respect everyone's time and want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you, Nico and Uzair, for the incredible conversations and the topics that you covered. I'm sure this is going to be useful for our audience members. For everyone on the webinar, we'll reach out to you for feedback and how we can improve, but hopefully this 1 hour during this time from work from home was valuable, and we're happy to assist in any way we can. If you have any questions additionally for Nico or Uzair, do let us know, and we'll be happy to respond individually and get those responses. So once again, thank you, Nico. Thank you, Uzair. Wonderful talking to you both.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.